Good morning. Hello and welcome. I'm Jeremy Leffler, and I work in the Policy Office in the Division of Institution and Award Support at the National Science Foundation. It is my pleasure to welcome you to Day 2 of the Fall 2024 NSF Virtual Grants Conference. And I'm now pleased to turn over this session to our presenters, who will be covering topics in award management at NSF.
Welcome, and thank you for joining the Awards Management presentation for the Fall 2024 NSF Grants Conference. There are presentations on proposal preparation and submission, merit review, and policy updates, among others. This session will provide information on NSF awards and aspects of managing an NSF award. Note that the NSF funding rate is currently around 25% overall, and some programs might actually be lower than that, depending on the program itself. There are currently around 46,000 active awards to over 3,000 unique awardee organizations. So that gives you a little bit of an overview of what this session really is and those people who actually get our awards. What you see here these are the speakers for our sessions, and they will actually introduce themselves as they move forward. And we will start the presentation. Let's get started. And Lynda Kummelt will be the first speaker.
Thank you, Jeff. My name is Lynda Kummelt, and I am a grant specialist in the Division of Grants and Agreements. Thank you all for joining us today. The Division of Grants and Agreements, or DGA, issues a few different types of awards. The principal purpose of the awards is to transfer anything of value from NSF to the grantee for them to carry out a public purpose, and not to acquire property or services for NSF's direct benefit or use. A standard grant provides you all the funds at once, while a continuing grant provides funds over the course of 2 or more years. A cooperative agreement is similar, but has extra terms and conditions applied. A fellowship is different from a grant or cooperative agreement because the funds go directly to the fellow. A grant or cooperative agreement is issued to the institution, not the principal investigator. The mission of DGA is to support the issuance of NSF assistance awards and other agreements by providing business, financial, and award administration assistance from pre-award through closeout. DGA processes and awards the majority of NSF's assistance awards through a variety of business, financial, and administrative reviews, ensuring compliance with the terms and conditions, NSF policies, and federal rules and regulations. The DGA Grants and Agreements officers issue awards on behalf of NSF, along with issuing award amendments and post-award requests through the life of the award and closeout. I will now provide a quick overview of the NSF award process from proposal submission to approval of the award. First, the institution will prepare the proposal for submission to NSF's electronic submission system, research.gov. Once it is submitted, the NSF program office associated with the proposal will make their review. Then the proposal will either be declined, which means a declination letter will be sent to the program from the program office, or it will be recommended and head to the Division of Grants and Agreements. There are several branches in DGA it may go to, depending on what program office it comes from. The grant specialist assigned to the program portfolio will do an administrative review to check that the policies are followed to correctly budget the funds and that the solicitation-specific terms are followed. Once the review is completed, there will either be a declination letter or you will receive the official award notice for your award. Award notices are issued electronically and can be accessed by the institution and principal investigator in research.gov. The award notices include the terms and conditions to be used for the award. NSF has put all of the relevant terms and conditions information on the nsf.gov website. Simply search for award conditions, and the page will provide information on research terms and conditions, grant general conditions, cooperative agreement conditions, SPIR, STTR terms and conditions, and special conditions. Another resource for conditions is the Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide, or the PAPG. Any extra conditions added to the award letter, such as participant support, will be available in the PAPG. The expanded authority allowed for the institution covers the revision of budget and program plans listed here. Included in this expanded authority is a transfer of funds for indirect and direct costs outside of participant support, incurring costs up to 90 days before the start date listed on the award notice, the first request of a no-cost extension, the ability to carry forward unobligated balances to subsequent budget periods, and the transfer of funds among direct cost categories. Principal investigators should work with their sponsored research office and NSF program officer if any of these cases arise. Some changes to the budget and program plans require prior written approval from NSF in the form of an official amendment. A change of scope or objectives will require prior written approval. Principal investigators should discuss this with their program officer to determine if their plans will require this approval. If there's a change to a key person listed on the application or award, disengagement from the project for more than 3 months, or a 25% reduction in the time devoted to the project by the principal investigator or project director, a request should be made. Any change to the approved cost sharing or matching also requires prior approval. Most no-cost extensions, which I will cover in a later slide, require approval. Transferring funds out of any line of the participant support budget or transferring funds into the other category of participant support need prior approval. If an award did not originally have a subaward budgeted, a prior approval request should be submitted to request subawarding, transferring, or contracting out any work under the NSF award. Prior approvals I went over here are some of the most common requests that come through programs and DGA. For a full list of prior approvals, go to the NSF website and search for the prior approval matrix. The NSF PAPG covers recipient notifications to NSF. These notifications include conflicts of interest that cannot be satisfactorily managed, reduced or eliminated, and research that proceeds without the imposition of conditions or restrictions when a conflict of interest exists. Other recipient notifications include the placement by the recipient of a PI or a co-PI on administrative leave or an administrative action, or the finding or determining that a PI or a co-PI has been found to have violated awardee policies or codes of conduct, statutes, regulations, or executive orders relating to sexual harassment, other forms of harassment, or sexual assault. There are 3 types of no-cost extensions: grantee approved, program office approved, and DGA approved. The grantee approved extension is requested in research.gov. There is no official amendment sent to the institution, only an updated end date and reporting requirements in research.gov. The next no-cost extension is reviewed and approved by the program officer. An official amendment is issued when this is approved. The third and any subsequent no-cost extension requests will be reviewed by the program officer and forwarded to DGA for final review and approval. Amendments are issued for these no-cost extension approvals. It is important to note that no-cost extensions are available to the institution to assure adequate completion of the original scope of work with the funds already made available. It is not allowable to request a no-cost extension simply to use up any funds that may remain after the project has been completed. If the award has a $0 balance, it cannot be extended. Principal investigators should work with the AOR to submit the request in research.gov. Please make sure to provide detailed supporting reasons for the extension of their extension request. A grantee approved request should be submitted at least 10 days prior to the end of the award. No cost extensions requested after that should be submitted at least 45 days prior to the end of the award. Now I'll turn it over to Jeff.
Thanks, Lynda. I am Jeff Vieceli. I am the head of the systems office in the Division of Institution and Award Support, the same division where the policy office is located. My team and I are responsible for the NSF, my NSF award system, the system where grants officers approve their awards and award amendments, as well as the NSF institution system, where all of the organization information is kept, including the unique entity identifier, the UEI, that's assigned by SAM.gov. So that info is all kept there. We are at the intersection of policy, process, procedure, and systems. And I am invited to speak at the conference because of my knowledge of how the policy and other business rules are actually put into the NSF systems. So let's start. And the first area that I'm talking about has to do with technical project reports. So we have annual project reports, and then we have the final project report. So those are both program officer reviewed and approved. The NSF keys everything off of the approval of the APR and the FPR, not the submission. That's an important piece to remember. It's not just simply the submission, it's the approval of the report. The APRs, those annual progress reports, are due at least 90 days prior to the end of the budget period. Whereas the FPR, the final project report, is due by 120 days after the end date of the award. It should also be noted that the FPR final project report is a final annual report. It is not cumulative. So again, what ends up happening is all of the APRs and the FPR cover the full period of performance for the whole award. The project outcomes reports, the POR, like final reports or the final annual, the FPR, are due by 120 days, and they are not approved by the program officers. They are posted verbatim based upon what the PI supplies and actually submits to the NSF. I should mention the next slide here, the submission of the final project report, that FPR, and or the public outcomes report or project outcomes report, the POR, basically do indicate to the NSF the completion of the project. So that information is included in the terms and conditions of the award, as well as on the banner page of research.gov when you actually go in to prepare and submit those reports. You see that information that says that this is indicating that I have completed the project. So what's important about this is do not submit the final project report and or the POR if the project is not complete. Because again, what ends up happening once those reports are submitted, the NSF believes you've completed that project, and we basically will close it out based upon the submission of those reports. Again, the report is really about, or the end of the project is really about the scope, the original scope, and any approved changes, and whether or not you've completed the project. So again, don't submit those reports if you've not completed the project, or if you're expecting a no-cost extension for any reason, or if you're expecting a supplement on the award, or you have a pending PI transfer, do not supply those reports. You should always, if you're the PI, you should always check with your sponsored research office and or the program officer, and you may get reports reset. It may be difficult to get those reports reset if you've already submitted them. So you have to be very careful with their submission. I should also point out that the submission of the reports has no effect on the payment. So funds may still be drawn down regardless of the report submission status. Your financial accounting folks should have access to those funds regardless of whether those reports have been submitted or not. So don't think that because you've submitted the reports that they no longer have access to those funds. Okay, so let's move into due and overdue reports and some of the things that we have end up happening with those reports. The NSF does send reminder notices when those reports are due and when they become overdue. I will point out that we start the due notices at 90 days prior to the end date for an APR, and we start them at the day after the award end date, because again, the project report is due, and then we send those overdue notices when they become overdue. The notices are sent to the PI, the co-PIs, any of the co-PIs that are active on the award, the SRO, as well as the program officer. So we are notifying everybody that those reports are due, and then also if they're overdue. Research.gov has a dashboard for the PIs, co-PIs, and the SRO. So you can go out and you should be able to quickly determine what awards you have what report requirements for. The PI and co-PIs, and again, it's any active co-PIs as well as the PI, actually have the ability and the authority to submit the project reports. The SRO does not have that authority or access. So the SRO cannot supply a report for the award. So in terms of a best practice, the Sponsored Research Office should track and follow up with the PIs about those report requirements and the submission and the status of those reports. And again, remember, it's not just a submission, it's the approval of those reports. So even if the PI or co-PI has submitted the report, they should follow up with the program officer if that report does not get approved. I would say that I would not expect the program officer to be sitting there and waiting for that project report to come in, so that it might take them some time to actually review it and approve it. So I wouldn't contact them the next day after you've submitted it and say, yes, I've submitted my report. Why isn't it approved yet? And again, I would recommend contacting the program officer if there are any issues or questions, especially if that project report is going to be delayed. You don't really want those reports to become overdue. And we'll move into the next slide here. Overdue reports. The most simple message about overdue reports is don't let it happen. If at all possible, again, reach out to your program officer as soon as you know there's an issue. Talk to the program officers. But again, those overdue project reports actually do create issues. They block the approvals of any action on that subject award. So we can't give you any amendments. We can't change the PI. We can't give no cost extensions. We can't give supplements. We can't give incremental funding. It's all blocked because of those overdue project reports. Not only do we block it on the subject award, but we also block it on any of the associated awards for the PI and any and all active co-PIs on that award. So it's a spider web effect. So again, we're catching people in our spider web if there are overdue project reports. So again, we're blocking actions on those awards. So a co-PI on one award that might be the PI on a different award may be blocked because there's an overdue project report on the award that they are the co-PI on. So again, that's an important piece to remember. The other thing that I will mention is that overdue project reports may be reported to SAM and FAPIIS as a material non-compliance with the terms and conditions of the award. At the end of the fiscal year, when supplements are awarded, overdue project reports will block those actions, and program officers will move on and get that supplement to a different award. I've seen cases where PIs and awards have lost out on like $1 million supplement just simply because they had an overdue project report. Again, don't let it happen to you. Get those reports in, get them approved, talk with your PO. The next slide talks about the NSF actually ran and completed a project report pilot program for the submission of APRs, annual project reports. So what we actually did was we stopped the drawdown of funds on the subject award until those reports were submitted. And guess what the results were? The NSF saw an increased compliance with the submission of those APRs. So we are actually still determining what the next steps might be. But if I was placing bets, I would imagine that we will increase that to be more of a pilot, and we will actually start shutting down the drawdown of funds on awards that we have overdue APRs on. The Federal Awardee Performance and Integrity Information System, FAPIIS, is now actually part of SAM, the System for Award Management. NSF and other federal agencies must report information if a final report or that POR is not submitted by 1 year after the end of the award. So per 2 CFR 200, the uniform guidance, this could affect any new awards for an awardee organization or for the PI, because again, it's a material non-compliance with the terms and conditions of that federal award. So again, as a best practice, I would tell you to track your report requirements, whether you're a PI, whether you're a co-PI, whether you're an AOR or someone at the SRO. Someone should be tracking those report requirements that are available on research.gov and should make sure that those reports get submitted and approved in a timely fashion, especially at the end of the award. So let's move on to a slightly different topic, and that is PI transfers. The NSF refers to them as PI transfers, but they really are an award transfer. It's moving an award, an existing award, from one awardee organization to another awardee organization, in theory, because a PI has moved to a new organization. So the most important thing to remember here is that the awards are actually made to the organizations and not the PIs. It is not really the PI's award, it's the organization. So the organization actually controls those transfers, and they have options for what they can do. They can actually, if they wish to, appoint a new PI to the existing award. They can also approve and make a subaward from the existing awardee organization to the new organization where the PI is located. They can also agree to actually transfer the award from their organization to the new organization. Or if they don't like any of those other three options, they can actually end the award. So they can terminate it. So again, the important thing here is that it's the organization's decision. The NSF does not really get involved. So if there's a dispute between the awardee organization and the PI, the NSF does not play referee. We're not going to come in. We're not going to say, yes, you must transfer the award to the new organization. Again, guidance here would be contact your program officer and or the grants officer for additional information. And again, remember with PI transfers, career awards actually do not have the ability to appoint a new PI and or do a subaward organization. The established program to simulate competitive research, EPSCoR, does not allow their funds to be transferred from an EPSCoR state to a non-EPSCoR state. So you would have to deal with the Division of Grants and Agreements to see what we could do to maximize the funds that could be transferred from the original awardee organization to the new awardee organization. Another best practice is before you actually submit that PI transfer, do a reconciliation. If you're the original awardee organization, you want to look at any unpaid bills that you might have in terms of payroll, subaward invoices, equipment that you've not been reimbursed for. You want to make sure you get reimbursed before you do that PI transfer, because NSF cannot transfer, number one, more than what's available in the award. And we cannot, there's no way to do a second transfer once the first transfer happens. So start early in terms of the PI transfer process, reach out to the NSF. Currently, again, there's no option to change the PI on an award as part of a PI transfer. So if the new organization says, well, we want to accept the award, but we wish to appoint a new PI, they can't do that as part of the transfer. There is also currently no ability to add a subaward via the transfer. So what we instruct people to do is actually do the transfer, get the award moved to the new organization, and then once the transfer has happened and the new award is at the new organization can come in and use the notifications and requests that are currently built into research.gov to then do the addition of a subaward and or change personnel or add personnel. With that concludes what I am speaking, and I will turn it over to Tess Tulley, and she will continue the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. My name's Tess Tulley, and I am a Grants and Contract Cost Analyst in the Division of Institution and Award Support at NSF. DS supports the grants lifecycle through providing business assistance to key stakeholders within NSF and across the research community. I'm going to discuss today unallowable costs. Simple definition of what unallowable costs are: costs that cannot be reimbursed be it by a contract or grant because they are prohibited by federal regulations, campus policy, or mutual agreement with the government agency. Examples of these unallowable costs would be such expenses: personnel expenses, alcoholic beverages, entertainment, lobbying or fundraising, fines and penalties, relocation costs in some situations, specific travel costs that are unallowable, cash donations, and goods and services for personal use. Costs that do not meet the criteria of reasonableness, allowability, allocability, and consistency are also unallowable costs. As you can see on this slide, these costs should also align with uniform guidance, Part 31 of the FAR, NSF's PAPG, the Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide, as well as federal travel regulations. Also, unallowable costs do cause delays in the budget proposal approval process. Examples or information relative to unallowable costs. Proposed versus actual compensation. This is something we have seen in other situations. Proposed costs are not allowable. We need to see the actual costs that were incurred. That could be salary, that could be equipment, items, supplies, materials. A lot of times we'll also see application of the incorrect fringe or indirect cost rates. Other examples would be unreasonable travel costs, such as hotel per diems that exceed the daily per diem for the area that you're staying at, if the rates are higher than normal or what is allowed. Personal travel costs that would not be associated, that we would not allow an award, such as having your family travel with you. Those costs associated with their hotel stays would not be allowable. Meals charged to an award for employees that are not in a travel status. So you can't have your staff go out for lunch together and then book that cost against the award. Additionally, participant support costs that are not adequately documented, especially meals and other typically unallowable costs such as entertainment, gifts, promotional items. Those are also unallowable costs. Example of such things such as field trips to baseball parks, theaters, gifts such as totes or t-shirts, things of that nature. These items require specific details in your proposal budget justification, and the post-award prior approval is needed if it's determined to be allowable. Here is what we define in the regulations: what allowable, reasonable, allocable, and treated consistently are defined as. For allowable costs, these are costs that are necessary and reasonable for the performance and administration of the award. These are the costs that a prudent business owner would identify as an allowable cost and would be typical to the activities of this entity. Reasonable costs would be, as a prudent business owner, you would want to make sure that the costs you're paying are appropriate. You're not going to pay $100 for a box of nails for something if you know you can get that same box of nails for $2 somewhere else. Allocable is specific to these federal awards, goods, and services to ensure that the costs are allocated to the benefiting project. So there's a causal beneficial relationship between the cost and where it's being allocated to. The costs can be transferred to a benefiting project if they're housed somewhere else, but they have to be substantiated through documentation. Allocable costs can also be direct or indirect. It just depends on the nature of the cost itself. And consistency is very important as well. This is part of the uniform guidance. And for consistency, costs should be charged either direct or indirect, like F&A costs, depending on their identified benefit to the particular award itself. Some costs can be treated both direct and indirect. It's the nature of the cost that you need to really hone in on to ensure that you're applying it correctly and you're being consistent in its treatment. Costs incurred for the same purpose must be treated consistently across the board. An example of a cost that should be treated consistently across the board would be such as if you have the salaries of the staff that are working on the project, their salary should be accounted for the same way that the salary for the clerical staff that work at the institution, how their salary is being treated. So it should be consistent across the board. Two additional criteria that we look into, or another additional criteria we look into, is conformance, that the costs conform with federal law, that we're not circumventing any statutes in that capacity, that also conforms with your state and local policies, and that their limits and exclusions are identified in the terms and conditions of the award. If there's any confusion about that, please make sure that you speak to your DGA representative to ensure that the award is documented fully as to the nature of these costs that might be treated a little differently. You also have to make sure that your entity is complying with GAAP, which is the basis of accounting in the United States. And that we should also have all of our costs be net of any applicable credits. Also, these costs need to be adequately documented. Any costs that you book, you should be able to support that cost with things such as timesheets, effort reporting to ensure that the time spent on the project is accurately documented. That you receive and maintain all of your purchase orders for equipment or supplies that you're purchasing, that they are identified to support the award, and that they're properly documented that they do support the award and that they're a reasonable cost. This goes for purchase orders, vendor invoices, any receipts of those nature. And that when you look at your costs, that you have to make sure that they are adequately documented in the correct category of costs. This will really become applicable with participant support costs, which we'll discuss here shortly in another slide. Here's some examples to provide this is not exhaustive list of examples, but these are some examples to help you understand how to identify costs as unallowable versus allowable, and that sometimes these costs that are considered unallowable may be allowable in certain situations. So as you can see on the left, all the costs in that column are identified as unallowable, and they're kind of self-explanatory. Alcoholic beverages, of course, those are not allowable. Your alumni activities, which are of a social nature, those are not allowable. Tuition benefits for family members, bad debts for the institution, any contributions or donations that are done, lobbying activities fall into that as well. Goods and services for a personal use nature, different membership costs, those things can be all unallowable. Now, there are some situations, like you can see in the column on the right, where that same category, the criteria like 200.423, mentions on one side alcoholic beverages. On the other side, it talks about advertising costs as unallowable unless they are necessary to meet the requirements of that sponsored agreement. So there are some situations where the cost can be allowable. For public relations costs, those are unallowable unless they are specific to the agreement and they are noted in the award. Participant support costs are defined as 200.75 are allowable with the prior approval of the federal awarding entity such as NSF. Allowable conference costs also include such things as the rental of facilities, costs of meals and refreshments, transportation, and anything else of that nature that are restricted to the federal award. Temporary care for family members. Those are above and beyond regular dependent care that directly result from the travel to the conference are also allowable costs, provided that the conditions established in 2 CFR 200.474 are met. So to help you understand how to avoid some unallowable cost issues and pitfalls, we would strongly recommend that you reach out to your NSF representatives and discuss prior written approval. This is something that earlier we'd heard about, so I think it's very important that you be mindful of this. We also have a link in this particular document that shows you, it's the NSF prior approval matrix. You can actually click that link and it'll give you a step-by-step on how to apply for your prior approval. Your request must be submitted via research.gov. Also, unbudgeted subawards, changes of PI or co-PI. As Jeff just discussed, the whole that's about transferring PIs and co-PIs. We also have issues relative to the costs that are associated with that. These costs must be formally submitted to the request via research.gov, and they have to receive approval prior to applying those costs or those costs being considered allowable. Also, unsupported expenses by the subrecipient. As the primary recipient, it is your responsibility to ensure that your subrecipients are applying these rules and regulations and criteria just as you are. So you need to ensure that these costs have been substantiated and validated, that they adhere to record retention terms and conditions that are required for you as the prime awardee, and that you're fully documenting your risk assessment process to ensure that the subrecipient is applying the criteria necessary to avoid unallowable costs. Now, going on a little deeper, we have more information participant support relative to participant support costs. Event support costs specifically awarded for your award are things such as equipment rental, building spaces or facilities, any IT services that you might need to utilize. But these expenses cannot be processed as participant support costs. These support a conference or an event, but they're not direct participant support costs. Additionally, another area that we see some issues in would be indirect costs, your F&A rates. They are usually not allowed on costs budgeted as participant support costs unless the grantee's current federally approved indirect cost rate provides for allocation of F&A to participant support costs. That would be in your negotiated indirect cost rate agreement if you have one of those. Participant support costs must be accounted for separately in your accounting system. It has to have its own category, cost category. It can't be lumped into another area of your cost accounting in your account structure. Participant support costs other than those described in 2 CFR 200.1, such as stipends, subsistence allowance, travel allowance, registration fees, dependent care, and per diem paid directly to or on behalf of the participants, must be justified in your budget justification, and such costs will be reviewed by NSF. Entertainment costs are also an unallowable cost category that can get people into a little bit of trouble. The cost of entertainment, amusement, social activities, and directly associated costs to those costs, such as your tickets, your meals that might be doing that if there's lodging involved. All of those costs are unallowable. Those are entertainment costs. They're not a cost of doing business. They're not a cost of the grant itself. So you have to identify those costs and segregate them as unallowable. When costs that are typically considered as entertainment are necessary to accomplish the proposed objective, they must be included in the budget and justified in your budget justification. Travel, meal, and hotel expenses of grantee employees who are not on a travel status are unallowable per 2 CFR 200.438. All right, and our last slide about unallowable cost pitfalls is relative to meals and coffee breaks and fringe benefits. Meals and coffee breaks are never an allowable category for providing meals and coffee breaks to your employees. This is not a standard cost of doing business and is certainly not something that can be justified on an award. meals and expenses of employees who are not on a travel expenses. Travel status are always unallowable. Fringe benefits are allowable as a direct cost if not included in the indirect cost as a proportion to the salary charged to the grant, to the extent that these payments are made under formally established and consistently applied organizational policies. So as long as it's fully documented, we understand it, we can discuss whether or not those costs would be allowable to be applied that way. Lastly, this slide here provides you some links to our guidance that we utilize to determine the allowability, allocability, reasonableness, and consistency of costs. That would be our uniform guidance at 2 CFR 200, as well as the Federal Acquisition Regulations, specifically Part 31. And then we have NSF's understanding and application of these, which is the PAPG, the Proposal and Award Policy and Procedures Guide. This is updated annually. And then we have the Federal Travel Regulations, which is what we utilize to determine the correct treatment for travel costs associated with any of the activities on your awards. On the bottom of this screen, there is a link to some training that DIAS is providing. It's also some tools and resources that we have developed for the awardees going forward. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you, Tess. This has been a lot of great information, so I'll share some keys to success that will help you manage your award. Please ensure there's always an active principal investigator on the award. If this will change or has changed, it's the responsibility of the institution to make arrangements for a different PI. Ensure there are written policies and procedures, oversight of the award, and internal controls in place at the institution level. These should include information on how to determine if the funds are managed in a way that is allowable, allocable, reasonable, and necessary. Written policies and procedures should also include information on reporting requirements for NSF awards to ensure reports do not become overdue. When questions arise, there are best practices for whom to contact with a question. The institution-sponsored research office should be contacted if there are questions on preparing and submitting your proposal, general policy questions, and guidance in the PAPG. Please contact your NSF program officer if there are programmatic questions or questions about the funding opportunity. Your DGA Grants and Agreements officer will be happy to help with questions related to the NSF award. The NSF Policy Office will answer general policy questions, proposal preparations, and other information found in the NSF PAPG. It is very important to ask early and ask often for any questions you may have. Here are some helpful resources if you have questions. Our colleagues in the Division of Financial Management can help answer questions related to payments, financial policies, financial reporting, or ACMS. Check research.gov for any directions or edits for your award. If any error messages pop up, it is helpful to screenshot them when emailing the help desk and program officer. If there are any subawards on the award or requested after the award is made, make sure to submit the subrecipient information in the federal subaward reporting system. Thank you all for attending the session at the 2024 NSF Grants Conference for Award Management. Remember to ask early and ask often. Now we'll move into the question and answer portion of our session.
Okay, I'd like to thank you all for talking through all of this information, and I'd like to welcome our presenters back. We have been answering a lot of questions in the Q&A. By my count, looks like over 70 questions have been answered, and questions are still coming in. And what I've been trying to do is kind of look at a lot of these and look for questions that I think will be of benefit to the large group that we have today. And I've tried to bucket them in different topics. So I'm going to try and not jump around too much, but kind of stay focused on one topic before we move to the next one. Of course, jump in at any time if you have something you want to elaborate on. Okay, so the first topic that I wanted to touch on are no-cost extensions. Covered that quite extensively, but the first question I have here is that somebody is saying that if there is a $0 balance, Is it true that there cannot be an extension? I thought that was the purpose of a no-cost extension. Can you please explain?
I can take this one. In the PAPG under the no cost extension section, it does say specifically that, let me read it here. It says recipients are not authorized to extend an award that contains a zero balance. So that is stated specifically in the PAPG.
Okay. And then also sticking with no cost extensions, if you had somebody had requested a no cost extension but completed the work earlier than was anticipated, do they need to submit anything to NSF, any type of prior approval to remove PI effort or anything else in the event that they finish sooner?
I'm not sure how to answer the PI effort part. If the award has been ended and you've put in your final report, then the PI effort should have been updated that way on the institution's end. So once the final report is put in, then the award will start to close on our end.
Okay, I'm gonna switch. Go ahead, Jeff.
I was just going to add to that yes, you would not need to submit any sort of a request or notification in that case.
Okay, let's move on to award transfers. We had a number of questions here on this topic. So when there is an agreement to transfer to a new organization or institution, is that decision made by the institution? How does who should be contacted at NSF for guidance? Should they be contacting the grants officer, the program officer? Who should be the first line of inquiry in this case?
I can take that one too. When there's an award transfer, it is negotiated between the two institutions. It's probably a conversation that the PI should be having with their program officer to discuss, how the transfer will go forward. But it all boils down to the two institutions deciding together what to transfer and how the budget's going to look like and things like that.
Okay, and then perhaps we can go into how the mechanics of that and what needs to be submitted when there's a transfer and there's new key persons being added. There may be a new subaward that's being requested. How does that work for when we're talking about award transfers?
I can take that one. In terms of adding new personnel, if you go back and you listen to the original presentation, currently the NSF is not supporting adding new personnel during the transfer process. Again, it is we're transferring the PI to the new organization. Once the transfer is made, the new organization would come in and change the personnel as they need to. And we realize that is a little bit of a burden from an administrative standpoint. But again, the reasoning for that is that the transfer process is already very complicated. So adding the additional complication of adding personnel and getting all of the new current and pending support documents, the bio sketch, all that other documentation would add additional layers of complication to that transfer process. So as I noted in my response to a question that came up, we continually review the notifications and requests and how we can make them better so that we can talk about this internally at the NSF and see what additional changes we can make. But that is one of the reasons why you can't change the personnel as part of that original transfer. It's the same thing with subawardee organizations currently. We do not support adding a subaward as part of that transfer. Again, it's get the transfer made, then come back and ask for the request for the addition of a subaward post-award. And again, we realize that that's not necessarily the best option, but again, the transfer process is already extremely complicated. But we will look at it and we will review it.
Thanks, Jeff. Let's move on to reporting. You talked about the kind of the web of issues that can happen when there are late reports, whether they're annual reports or more especially final annual reports. So what recourse does a co-PI have if the PI is late with their reporting?
That's a good question. I would assume that if you're a PI and co-PI that you have some sort of a relationship with each other. I would sort of leverage that relationship and say the report is overdue. The PI may not even know that it's overdue, or they may not really realize that it's causing, as a co-PI, that it's causing you issues on other awards that you might be associated with. So that's the first step, is I would leverage that personal relationship that I would think would be there. The second thing is co-PIs, just like a PI, do have the ability and authority from NSF policy to submit those project reports. Not that I'm necessarily suggesting that, because again, that might create some dynamics in the workplace between the PI and co-PI, but the co-PI, if it ultimately comes down to it, co-PIs do have the ability, just like a PI, to prepare and submit those project reports. And I imagine that there are also various things that you could reach out to the program officer and or to your sponsored research office. So
Great. We're going to stick around here with some reporting questions. So let's say you are a co-PI with a subaward organization. Do those reporting repercussions impact the subaward organization as well, or the co-PI from the subaward organization, or just the prime awardee organization?
It depends. In most cases, it would not affect the subawardee organization or the subawardee PI at all, unless that PI from the subaward is directly named on the award as a co-PI. So again, there are certain cases where there are organizations that will allow the PI from a subawardee to be a co-PI on the actual award. If that is the case, they would get caught up in that web. But if they are not specifically listed as a PI or co-PI on the prime award, they are not affected.
Okay, and we had a number of questions asking why administrators at organizations cannot work on project reports. And this has become, I think it's a bigger issue now that we have multi-factor authentication in place. But can you talk a little bit about perhaps how administrators could work with their PIs to ensure that they are getting their reports in on time?
Okay. First and foremost, I should say that the NSF does not encourage nor support sharing login information. So that's number one. Do not share your login information with other folks. Again, this is an area where, again, we've had a lot of internal debate as well as we do hear from the external community. The main reason why we do not allow the SRO to prepare and do the reports is because they are technical progress reports. And in most cases, the program officers do not feel that someone at the SRO or an AOR would be sufficiently versed in the project to be able to supply the information from a technical standpoint. So that is why it's left to the PI or co-PIs. We have, again, had some internal discussions. As I said, we continually look at the notifications and requests as well as the reporting process. And we have had some discussions about, could it be possible to allow someone at the SRO to start or help assist with creating those reports, but then have the reports actually submitted by a PI or co-PI. So there are things that we are looking at internally, but again, no clear decisions have been made yet. But that's the reason why technical reports come from the PIs, And then again, we do not encourage sharing credentials.
We actually prohibit it now.
Yes.
I want to move into an area of costs where we received a lot of questions about costs. First one being there may have been some confusion from folks asked, because I saw this question a couple of times about student stipends, and whether or not those can be considered an eligible expense on NSF awards. Tess or Lynda, do you want to take that one?
I'm not as comfortable in this area, Jeremy. I'm going to be perfectly honest. I would actually rely on my leads to help me understand the question fully.
Okay, well, let me take a shot at that. First of all, you would want to make sure when you are responding to a particular funding opportunity that it doesn't prohibit that. However, student stipends would be an eligible expense on an NSF grant. However, there may be nuances, and you'd want to speak, of course, to your program officer if you had questions about it at the proposal stage. And then if it was something you were considering rebudgeting after the award has been made, you'd want to speak with a cognizant grants officer on that. Maybe we can go to some specific costs. I saw a number of questions asking about membership costs and whether or not those would be an allowable expense, whether they were perhaps membership costs related to a professional organization or to an organization that was connected to the research itself.
Just for everyone's understanding about membership costs, they can be allowable as an indirect cost, not as a direct cost to the grant, because they're generally considered a cost of activity, not specific to a research project. So those costs are allowable in your indirect cost pools. So if you have an indirect cost rate, a negotiated indirect cost rate, those costs would be captured within that and then represented in the application of your indirect cost rate to the costs that you're proposing in the grant. However, if you don't have an indirect cost rate negotiated already, then it would be part of the de minimis rate calculation.
Okay, and then the another cost question would be, can participant support costs include research materials and supplies that the participants are using for the award?
I believe those would be permissible as long as they are related specifically to the grant that the participants are working on or associated with.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about meals. And can you provide a little clarification on the allowability of catering or meals for participants during workshops and meetings?
Meals are permissible for participants in a travel status. So if your participants are coming from out of your local commuting area, then those costs are expense. Those meals are permissible for those. But for local activities, if people are local to the area, then meals are not permitted. They're not an allowable expense.
Okay, and then sticking with participant costs, if there are participant costs that were budgeted and approved for a conference proposal, but then there's a change in the actual costs, would that need to have a prior approval? Would there need to be a prior approval submitted and approved by the grants officer for that award?
I think Lynda might have a better response to that than I would.
So the prior approval needed for participant support is if you're moving any of the cost F1 through lines F4 out of participant support, or if you're going to be moving any funds into F4 other. So those are the things that require prior approval. So you can look in the PAPG under prior approval, and that'll take you to the matrix that lists everything that needs prior approval.
Okay, and sticking with you, Lynda, there was a question about funds transfers. So in an award, there's an approved budget, and the awardee realizes they need to move funds between cost items. Let's leave participant support out of it for this example, but they need to move funds from one cost category to another. Are they allowed to do that? And what is the process for an awardee doing this?
So at the bottom of the award letter, it talks about rebudgeting authority and also talks about it in the FAPIIS. So if you're going to be moving costs between direct cost categories, that's allowable from the rebudgeting authority the institution has. It'll just need to be tracked on the institution side. That wouldn't need a prior approval for direct costs.
Okay, and Lynda, there was a question about travel and the policy on foreign travel. Again, if there was not foreign travel originally budgeted in the proposal, but then the awardee realizes that this is necessary, what should they do to make this happen?
That I do not believe needs a prior approval, but I would tell the PI to contact their program officer to discuss it. You can also contact your DGA grant specialist. I'm not sure if that's a policy. I don't think that's in the policy.
Okay, I had another cost question asking about IRB costs and whether those would be considered part of overhead or if those were direct costs that could be charged to a grant.
I don't have an answer for that one. I don't deal in my portfolio with a lot of IRB costs, so I'm not for sure about that one. If no one else has the answer, I would say contact your DGA specialist.
Be likewise, because it's not an area that I have addressed yet on the DS side either.
Okay, I'm seeing a lot of repeat questions about research.gov. We covered that, so I'm not going to go into that. What I would say is that there is a wealth of information in the document that has been mentioned by, I think, every single person on this panel, and that is the NSF Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide. Not only does it include information for how to prepare your proposal, but it is part 2 of that guide. Will give you all of the information you need to manage your award. So that should be number 1, the first place you go. Then when you do have an award, that award notice will come with your award terms and conditions. So that will also be very helpful information for you in terms of what is allowable and what is not allowable. I do want to thank all of the presenters here today and all of my colleagues helping out behind the scenes and answering questions. Before we wrap up, I'm going to mention again, as I mentioned yesterday, to save the dates of May 21st to May 23rd, 2025, as we convene for the Spring 2025 NSF Grants Conference. That will be in person. It will be in New Orleans, Louisiana. If you're unable to join us in person, a virtual option will be available for you. So we hope to see you there, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.